be a Jewish tradition years ago that they used to have so-called Yichesbrief. Brief is the word letter. And Yiches means source of the family. This used to be years ago. But this tradition got lost because of the wars. In this way, they preserved the history and the tradition of the families and of the whole community. With the destruction of the European Jewry, not then this books, memorials got lost. This got lost centuries ago. Most of this private family memorial books, as called, disappeared.
That was my grandfather. I never met him. He died before I was born in 1990. But my whole life, he looked out at me from pictures on the walls of my grandma's apartment in New York City. His name, Dr. Joseph Badi, from the spines of his published books. Brief glimpses in old home videos. When my grandma passed away in 2018, my family spent a lot of time cleaning out her apartment. All of my grandfather's things were still in there too. She had never gotten rid of them. At the time, my mom said it felt like losing him all over again. But I felt like I was meeting him for the first time. Where do you start a thing like this? Well, I started by making a list of everything that I think I know about him from childhood. But then I took all of the data that I think I had figured out and I put it in this giant timeline document. But even that was not enough to satisfy me. So I took every location that I could figure out that he had ever been, whether he wanted to be there or was forced to be there, whether he lived there or stayed there briefly for any period of time, and entered all of that onto a custom Google map. And by this point, my Google Drive was getting completely out of control and all super stressful and overwhelming. Let's just start with the list. A list of things that I knew about him growing up, compiled between November 1st, 2020, March 1st, 2021. Because after that, I started asking people questions, and I would hate to be an unreliable narrator right from the start. He spoke 7 languages. He had these tiny little notebooks where he would write the word in Hebrew, Yiddish, and then in the new language that he was learning. There was a green lamp, kind of like one of those old-timey library lamps, on the desk at the foot of the bed. He was from Poland. Of course, the part of Poland that he was from is now in the Ukraine, but growing up, we always learned that we were a quarter Polish. He was a Holocaust survivor. He died before I was born. He looked very, very old in photos. He was sad that my dad wasn't Jewish, which I'm sure is a broad oversimplification of the matter, but Jewish tradition was very important to him. He loved my dad, but the wedding was full of Jewish traditions in the end, married under a canopy, my dad smashed the glass, chair dance, all that good stuff. And it's funny because, like, thinking back on that, the married under a canopy seems like the key part, but that also might just be me mixing up my family's story with a plot line from Fiddler on the Roof. He had a PhD from NYU. This is a funny one. I, growing up, don't have any idea where I got this story from, but I was under the impression that he met my grandma while she was working in a yarn shop, which doesn't make any sense because why would he have been walking into a yarn shop? But I was sure that this was true. So the actual story, which I will share with you today, is that she was working at the American Jewish Congress at the time, and he was there for a meeting. She enters this meeting room to distribute paychecks to all of the employees of the American Jewish Congress, of which he was not one, gives everyone their checks, and he's like, well, where's my check? And she's like, you don't work here, you don't get a check, and leaves. And he immediately asks the men at the American Jewish Congress for her desk number so that he can call her and take her out on a date. And here I am. My grandma had to make 2 kinds of matzo ball soup because she liked matzo balls that were light and fluffy, and he liked more dense matzo balls, which is funny because I also love dense matzo balls. It's a thing, in case you're not aware, the fight between the light and fluffy and the dense. But what I don't actually know is if I like dense matzo balls because of this story or because it's just my actual taste. Apparently he had very ridged fingernails, which my mom also has, which the older I get, the more ridged my fingernails get. He built our kitchen table, my childhood kitchen table, which is this like 1,000-pound table. And he's such a small man. And, of course, that on November 27th, 1987, he sat down with my mom and her brother Mark to record these tapes and share his story. And one more thing, the first thing that I remember learning from the tapes, actually, is that he changed his name. Badi is a name that he chose for himself. But I will let him tell you that part of the story.
It is known that survivors, among them me, they don't talk too much to their family about this. They reveal the history of this mostly at meetings, at memorials, or when they publish or books, scientific books, or their own diaries. And I want you also to be aware of this, especially in our case, that I changed my family name. My family name, our family name was Leinwand, which is a German name, in which it's clear to you, I assume, that I wasn't happy. And another thing, when I arrived before the end of the war to Palestine, which is today's Israel, there was a trend by the Jewish community leaders of the Jewish Agency to Hebraize the names into Hebraic names. Leinwand means in German linen. In Badi, Bad means linen in Hebrew, and the suffix is like a Hebrew suffix, and also this suffix are used in Italian. Like other languages have suffixes in them, like the Polish ski, sky, the Ukrainians, etc.
I'm not sure when I learned that I was half Jewish, but it feels really tied to learning that he was a Holocaust survivor. Like, I'm Jewish, so the Holocaust is just another part of my heritage, weirdly. I remember being in second grade with Scott, the only other Jewish kid in the class, and high-fiving when we got to sing the Hanukkah song out of the big songbook during the holidays. And we're like, yes, this is us. This makes us special. This makes us different. Light the menorah, 8 nights of presents, and for me, they're all going to be chapter books and socks. But I'm not sure if I knew about the Holocaust then. Like, the first time that I for sure remember hearing about it was when I learned about these tapes. The story of my grandfather telling how he survived the Holocaust, or as he puts it, how he survived Hitler. Because it's very personal. He doesn't talk about Nazis, he talks about Hitler. So at some point, my little brother had to do this assignment where he had to interview an older family member. And I guess at that point, we knew enough for him to say that he wished that he could interview our grandfather. And my mom was like, well, we can sort of make that happen because we have these tapes telling his story. So my mom and her brother have heard them. My brother and I have heard them. And some other family members have heard them. And now you all get to hear them today. And I think at some point they were submitted to Oprah when she was doing a Holocaust episode, but as far as I can tell, that episode never happened. So, it's just us. But it's more than just sharing, because for me this is really about a search for connection, a way to sort of fill in one of the missing puzzle pieces in the incomplete picture that is me. And I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Rebecca Wahls. 1 year into a master's degree, and the only thing that I've ever really wanted to do is make theater. I was born in Williamsburg, Virginia. There was one synagogue there, and we didn't go to it. My parents met working at NASA. Most people call me Rebecca, but some people call me Becca, and if you call me Becky, I'll slap you. I've got one younger brother. His name is Benjamin, but most people call him Ben now. My grandfather, Joseph Badi, formerly Joseph Leemwand, Joe to some, Uncle Joe to others, Uncle Joey only to my cousin Jason, was born in a small town in Poland called Kuty.
I myself was born in a small town on the border with Romania, Kuty, Kuty, a community that had, I would say, more or less 15 to 2,000 Jewish people, not families, Jewish people. I was born as the fourth son of our family. Your uncle Shulam, who lives now in Israel, was the fifth. And the only sister that perished during the war, we used to call her Muchi, but she was named after my father's mother that I never met. She died before I was a youngster. Shifra. She perished during the war.
Couldn't be more different on the surface. But certain stories that he tells do remind me of my own childhood, in the 90s when we just ran around and sharpened sticks and made rock collections. I was the oldest sibling, of course, whereas he had 4 older siblings, but I did have a whole flock of older neighborhood kids that looked after me the way that it sounds like his older siblings looked after him. Also, I've always thought that I looked more like my dad's side of the family than my mom's. But as a kid, I was pretty round. I had big old cheeks and 100% more dimple than I have now, if you can imagine. So, imagine my delight and surprise when I heard this.
As you see, I was a chubby kid. Yes. And I was known about this. They used to call me in Yiddish the Grober, the heavy. So I was the Grober, and they used to go, the big 3 brothers, of course, used to go and used to take me with them. And always there used to be somebody who used to be in charge of me. Not to leave the Grober alone.
So at this point in the story, we're around World War I. His father served, and the rest of the family was evacuated into Austria. Now, he talks about this town a lot in the tapes. That's where the Grober story took place. All of the stories of his childhood take place in this small town in Austria. But the thing is, I can't figure out where this town is. I've spent hours poring over Google Maps, Google Translate, trying my very best to figure it out. And in the end, this is the list of evidence that I was able to compile about this town. So we know it's a small village in Austria. We know that it's 1918. He says they were evacuated deep into Austria, practically on the border of Switzerland. He refers to it as a small, small village close to a big city, possibly called Ishu. It's in the mountains, and it's by a lake with a ship. That's all we know. And
this was a village not far from the city Ishu. I remembered until a few minutes ago the name of the village, but now I forgot it.
Knowing until just a minute ago and then forgetting as soon as it's time to record. And I mean, to be fair, he spent, 2 to 3 years there as a young child, but his memories of the lake and the ships and being called a Grober while World War I raged all around but just out of sight are just as vivid as my memories of baseball in the cul-de-sac with the neighborhood kids while American soldiers were sent off to Afghanistan and Iraq. And in a way, it makes me trust that my memories are actually real, because I know that his memories are real, because unlike me, he doesn't have 1,000 photos of himself as a child to prove that it all happened. He's got one photo, actually. This one, taken in 1918 in Austria. This is him with all of his siblings. He's on the bottom right. And this one, taken several years later in Kuty. He's on the top left with the glasses. This is the only photo of him with all of his siblings. Mounier, the oldest.
My brother Mounier, the oldest, with a group of other Jewish people, very energetic. He was caught by the Germans. They tried also to go over to Romania in a very, and they liquidated the person.
Zeinwohl.
My second brother, Zardo, who was a very delicate man, they took him away to the camp in Lvov, the known camp, terrible camp, Yanovska Street, and there he perished.
Chaim, who survived and eventually made it to Israel-Palestine. Shulam, who also made it to Israel-Palestine. I've met his daughter Rivka, who I'm named after, a few times over the years. And Mutchi, the only sister.
Where my sister perished until this day.
There's just so much that we don't know. That we can't know. But remember the small town in Austria where the photo was taken, the lake and everything? Well,
Oh, I remember the name of the place, Strobel.
but I still can't find that on a map. When my mom was young, she and her brother went to Jewish summer camp. It was called Kfar Masada, and it was in the Catskill Mountains. My grandma worked there, and grandpa would come up and visit on weekends. My mom hated it there. But ironically, my grandparents both seemed to make lifelong friends at summer camp. My mom remembers that every summer, for Holocaust Remembrance Day, the camp would do a big presentation. The older students would create tableaus of the Holocaust, which the younger students would walk through. And then they would show footage of survivors, prisoners, liberating the camps. My mom says that she was terrified that one day she would see his face up on that screen. She said she was scared because she didn't know how she would react. And it's funny because for the past several months, I feel like I've been desperately searching for his face in a place that I wasn't expecting to find it, looking in photos of crowds, wondering if I'd even recognize him if I saw him, hoping to find his name somewhere I wasn't expecting it. But I guess I don't know how I would have reacted either. She also doesn't ever remember being in the tableaus herself. When I was in middle school, I got to play Anne Frank in my community theater's production of The Diary of Anne Frank. Not only would this be my first lead dramatic role, but also it was deeply connected to my heritage, and I went into that ready to feel things. The whole environment really played into that. This will be a tough experience. We won't have a curtain call because it will be so hard. Instead, the stage manager will bring you a glass of orange juice to drink while you lie in the dark on this bench after the curtain falls, and the sound of Mozart's Requiem fills the theater, and you were just so very sad and connected to your character. I mean, I did it. I did the play. I'm sure I was fine. But when I laid there on the bench after with my orange juice in the dark, I didn't really feel anything except the pressure to feel something, which made me feel like a fake Jew. After that, as I got a little older, people really leaned into the Jewish thing. In high school, there were multiple people who casually called me Jew, like as a jokey, friendly thing, and I went along with it. Whatever. There was even this one kid who I considered a good friend who made jokes about Hitler coming to get me. I think the thing is, it was easy to treat it all like a joke, because I had asked for it, and I could hide it if I needed to. But not once, as a teenager in the late aughts, did I feel like any Nazi, let alone Hitler, was coming for me. So, how did he survive Hitler? On the brink of World War II, he was just about my age, almost 30. He was busy traveling back and forth between Kuty in the teacher's college in Wolf, teaching Hebrew, and hoping to earn enough money to travel to Jerusalem to continue his education. And then everything changed. I'm going to use a document that he created that he called the addenda to his CV to guide us through this next part, but for the most part, I'm going to let him tell it. During World War II, I was, under the Soviet occupation, a member of the Jewish Youth Underground. As a result, arrested in Wolf and freed only with the German invasion a few days before I was to be sent to Siberia, 1939 to 1941. Under Nazi Germany, in the ghettos of Wolf and Kuty, as a slave laborer. After the liquidation of the ghettos, in which all my family perished, except for a brother who was among the Polish army prisoners in a German prisoner of war camp, I hid in the Carpathian Mountains, 1941 to 1942.
We prepared shelters, different ways. And it was assigned, everybody assigned where his shelter, not to look this in the last minute. My shelter was in the neighbor's toilet. In the toilet were field toilets, means a pit. Yeah, outhouse. So the wall, the back wall inside, in the outhouse, not in the boot. We made it double. And with one board to move away. And there I was when they attacked this town, I was there for 12 hours inside. And I remember a German came into the toilet, the outhouse, and he said, "Jude, wo bist du? Jew, where are you?" And after they finished the day of war, it was over. When this was over, I came to a conclusion. Then when I ran away, I said, there's no future. When we came out, the people who survived, they killed them, then I would say some 800 people. We had to go out and to collect all the killed people and to bury them in a general one mass grave. And the Ukrainian people were standing on top of us. But the cemetery was always lower down. And were giving them something to get rid of the Jews. And the German soldiers came down, the policemen by them, and took pictures. Luckily, I told you already what was my family, our family. Luckily, none of our family was killed in this war. Father was in one place, more or less, and other people, more or less, we survived.
After I escaped to Romania, was immediately arrested and transferred to the concentration camp in Mostovo in Transnistria, southern Russia, then under German-Romanian occupation, 1942 to 1944.
You can ask me how I survived. At the beginning, stop was in a city, Taraspol, where there was a small camp of Romanian Jews with special privileges. And there I developed a friendship with this leadership. And for some time they kept me there, being the unofficial representative of any Polish Jews that came there. In this way, most of the people that went with me, most of them perished. Young people. I don't remember the names. At the end, I committed a stupidity. I had a very good suit. And this Jew who was close with the authority, he wanted this suit. And I didn't give it. So they sent me away deep into this Transnistria. This is the place where, I would say, hundreds of thousands of Romanian Jews were killed. So when I came to this concentration camp, there, they said they need a painter. And everybody suddenly, every Jew started to be a handyman or even more than a handyman. A man that had a trade. You could find that then. Shoemakers, barbers, others. And I said, I'm a painter. Oh, they need a painter. Because they need to paint his offices. And I started to work there. Of course, I didn't paint. But I had a kitchen there for the Romanian people who worked there, for the officers, civilian officers. I developed a friendship with the people in the kitchen. And there was leftovers. They used to give me. But some of them realized that I'm not a real painter. So they brought in also a Russian painter, local Russian. He used to talk to me about Zionism, and I used to listen. He used to tell me about Herzlis, others. Once, when he was very frank, he said in Russian, "Ты такой красивый, как я поп." This means, you're such a painter like I am the Pope. And when this was more or less at the end of 43, was a terrible winter, and the Germans retreated already from the famous place, if you heard, Stalingrad, where there was a great defeat of the Germans. Great. And I remember when this Romanian military politician said to me, "Zeus, shall I continue?" Said to me, "Dushmani nostri ad vostri." To me, to the Jew, he said, which means in English, my and your enemies. He said about the Germans. I was shocked. Suddenly, this Romanian was a military policeman. They used to kill people like dogs. Start to be my friend. And a short time later, it was the June or the July attempt to kill Hitler, 44. He came running to me and said to me, "Hitler kaput!" And I had to control myself and not to say.
With the German defeat at Stalingrad, I retreated to Bucharest and was among the people who succeeded to reach Palestine in July 1944 by way of Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon.
I was among the people that got a certificate to go to Palestine. And they gave me everything that I needed. Suits, underwear, shirts, expenses. And I waited for this ship a couple of weeks. Nice place, lived like a nobleman. Came there to the port city. The ship was a ship that he wouldn't send cattle with. And we didn't go straight to Palestine. We went to the Black Sea to Turkey. From Turkey we went to Turkey, whole Turkey, from the north to the south. I will show you sometimes in the map if you want to see it. We went to Syria, Lebanon, then under British occupation, not independent states, British-French occupation, military occupation, into North Palestine. I reached Palestine. There they put us in a camp.
When I reached Palestine, I was arrested by the British authorities, presumably because of my excellent knowledge of German and Hebrew, and suspected as a German spy, and kept for some time in the Atlith camp.
We were officially legal, but it was war. They had to check. They had to check security. I was a youngster, I was a smart man, and I show off. And I don't know, I didn't speak English, but I spoke a good Hebrew, of course, Yiddish, Romanian, Polish, Russian. And the officer of the British, the Englishman, he spoke German. He wanted to speak German. Find out me. I said to him, I don't speak German. So nobody, after my experience, oh, you speak Romanian. So he looked around to the Jewish people who were his assistants. What do you do with this now? They said to me, English, what is with you? So he said he will punish me. I said to him, you can punish me? But the only punishment that I'm afraid is a bullet. So, his punishment was, we arrived something, I think 789 people on this ship. But he decided, in spite that I had an early number, I would go the last. I said, I don't do it. Because there I had all the papers, newspaper, gave me food, a clean bed that I didn't have for years, linen, everything. I said, well, what in Palestine? I had no body. I came out, finally they let me out. I punished them also, because there were a lot of people there, maintenance people, kitchen people, different officers, and they couldn't go home until they took care of all this 700, I said to you, 89 people. You know what I did? I went to the end of the camp, lie down on the shady spot and read the papers. They couldn't find me.
In Palestine, I was among the first staff members of Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial for the perished European Jewry, 1944 to 1953. Came to the United States in March 1953 as a student of political science at the New School for Social Research.
And I was ready to remain in the kibbutz. But two things held me back from this. First of all, I wanted to finish my studies. And number two, they made a mistake. They put me into a job, but physically I wasn't able to do it. So I tried in the Hebrew University. It didn't work. I tried different jobs at the Jewish Agency, the Organization of the Polish Jews. And again, because I was stubborn, they wanted me to join the majority party, and I said, I'm not joining the party for a job. Until I got in touch with Monko Otto, and he helped me to come here. And I came here on March the 20th, or the 10th, 1953, as a student.
Over the past several months, I felt real fear that we are on the brink of something. Like, do you think that the Romans knew that they were living in the fall of Rome? Did my grandfather know that he was growing up in a dying country? The weekend before the election, I was driving around and I had NPR on as per usual, and the reporters were talking about how people who live in cities should pack a go bag, just in case. I was in Pittsburgh at the time, which the FBI declared a hub for white supremacy late last year. Of course, this is where the Tree of Life shooting happened in 2018. A few weeks before that, I had been sitting in my apartment on a quiet Sunday afternoon and I heard yelling in the streets, and I was shocked at how fast my body transitioned into fear response. Of course, it was a Sunday in Pittsburgh. It was just the first Steelers game of the season. The Capitol riot in January, which happened only 15 miles from where I was staying at the time. My roommate started talking about getting a gun afterwards. Unite the Right in Charlottesville in 2017, where I will not and do not have to repeat what they chanted because I assume you know, because it must be a part of why you're here, because you, like me, are also looking for answers. I think if I could ask my grandfather one question, it would be that. This was the after, but what was the before? I guess a decent enough answer is religion. When I was a kid, I didn't grow up with religion at all. Like, I went over to my Christian friend's house and we watched VeggieTales, and I was like, oh my gosh, cool, the talking tomato. And she was like, yeah, actually, did you know the tomato is Jesus? And I was like, well, that seems kind of weird because I thought that Jesus was like a character from the Bible. So that's what we're dealing with here regarding religion in me. Several of my mom's cousins all tell the same story, that Uncle Joe was the most religious person that they knew. My mom was the only girl of their generation to actually have a bat mitzvah. And Passover at Uncle Joe's was the worst. Not only did you have to drive all the way into Manhattan when the rest of the family lived in Queens, but also you didn't get to eat until 10 p.m. because he made you do all of the actual observant religious stuff and actually do it right. So even if from my mom's perspective he was secular, he was still more concerned with preserving traditions than the rest of the family. And by the rest of the family in this instance, I mean my grandma and her two sisters and all of their families. I've never actually done Passover right, or probably any Jewish holiday for that matter. We'd make matzo ball soup, like right now, every year. And by the way, I love matzo ball soup, and I think it's absolutely sacrilegious to change anything about it, except who likes celery? No one likes celery. I use a leek instead. Game changer. But honestly, the most that I know about Passover comes from the Prince of Egypt movie. And in the Prince of Egypt movie, they tell the story very clearly. Moses comes back from his time in the desert, and now instead of being Egyptian Moses, now he's Hebrew Moses with the beard and the cape and the robes and everything. And he goes up to Ramses, who of course was his brother, who's also older now. He also has a slightly different look because he's the king now, not just the prince. And he's let my people go. And it's very cinematic, and it ends with them in the dark on a stage, I think, with two different spotlights. I don't know, maybe that's why I like theater. Anyway, I digress. So over the course of the song, they go through all of the plagues, the whole story of Passover, and of course it ends with the final plague, not portrayed as a part of the song, portrayed during the scene, where all of the Hebrews know that they have to paint a lamb's blood over their door so that God will pass over their house. Of course, the Egyptians don't know this, and so God literally kills the firstborn son of every Egyptian. And that's about all I know about Passover. So, I don't know. Honestly, it wasn't even until I went to college and I went to a few Hillel meetings that I even found out about the 4 questions of Passover, which, presumably is what was happening at Uncle Joe's house until 10 o'clock p.m. when he made them do Passover right. But what's funny is that why is this night different from all other nights is something that I had heard before, because that's a theater thing. Different every night, etc., etc., etc. So You know, that piece of language, even though it's in an entirely different filter, has been a part of my life for, as long as I have memory. I've always joked that theater is my religion, but maybe that's true. In any case, it seems important. I mean, my grandfather certainly thought it was, and all jokes aside, I obviously understand that this holiday is about affirming the unbroken link of our people across the generations. Now, there's a very narrow window when I would have been the youngest person in my family, and therefore the one that gets to ask the questions. The youngest person in the room is the one who gets to ask the questions. I know this because I Googled it, and also my mom told me. But I am the youngest person in this house, so even though it's not Passover season at all, it's like practically June at this point, I am going to ask the person in this house who I've decided qualifies as a Jewish elder to let me ask him the questions, because I want to see what he's going to say. Aaron! And you can also have some matzo ball soup.
What?
Yeah! Happy Passover in May!
Happy Passover in May.
It's like Christmas in July.
It's the same concept. That's really lovely.
We got soup. It's hot. It's soup that is too hot.
Soup that is too hot.
Yeah, so I'm thinking a lot about like Passover specifically and religion in general, like as I've been creating the show. Something that I don't think I've ever done that I'm like aggressively curious about is the 4 questions
Oh
of
God.
Passover. So can I ask you the questions?
Please.
And you can just like give me your
In this
version of the
situation, you are the
answers?
youngest child.
I am the youngest child. Exactly. For like the first time ever, so it's perfect. Okay. Should I start with how is this different from other nights?
Yeah, but you have to chant it in a way that like where your voice cracks and you're really nervous.
I have to chant it?
You have to chant these
Oh, because I'm a child.
Yeah, no, that's the rule. So the tradition, the real tradition, is that you rehearse, right? And so you would rehearse these things, and then you as the youngest child would have this honor, and you would approach whoever is staring at you the most intensely, and you would chant the 4 questions. They would like make us like practice, and they were like, all right, guys. Passover. Who here is the youngest child? All right, everyone get up. Everyone else, whoosh, don't. I mean, I think I know the answers. I think I know some of the answers.
Okay, great.
Yes. What were the questions again?
Okay, so the first question is, why is this night different from all other nights?
I think the answer is because on this night, we celebrate the Exodus from Egypt. Right? That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Like, that's what Passover is.
Right.
Right? This night is different from all other nights because we are, because it's a holiday.
Love it.
And it's a holiday about a specific thing.
Which is what?
The Exodus from Egypt. Which is when the Jews, shall I?
Yeah, sure.
Which is when I believe in the story, when Moses, when Pharaoh was, when Pharaoh did not let his people go for the 9th time, the angel of death came down the angel of death came down and killed the firstborn child of anyone who did not mark their door with lamb's blood, which at the time made sense because there is an association with the lambing, like in that particular part of the year is associated with like the time of year that lambs are born, and that would have been a very important thing and a very important sign that of I guess subservience to God, that you would be killing your lambs and using their blood to mark your door, specifically as someone who is a believer. And then the angel came down and killed all the Egyptian firstborn, including Pharaoh's firstborn. And then Pharaoh was like, okay,
I'll let your people go.
get out of here. Or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. Okay, so on other nights, we eat leavened food and matzah.
Mm-hmm.
On this night, why only matzah?
Because, I know this one. Because the Jews did not have enough time to let the bread rise, right? So, which is kind of funny when you think about it. Like, they didn't have enough time to let the bread rise. But you would think that if, like, making bread was a regular thing, they would have had bread ready to go. Right? Like, think about it. Like, it wasn't like They were like, we have bread in multiple stages of bread, right? We've got the yeast and then the rye, and like, like we've all watched Great British Baking Show.
There's also the done bread.
There's the done bread. You could have been like, oh, we only pack the unfinished bread. But I believe it's because the Jews were they were out of there so fast that they did not have time to wait for the bread to rise, which is, I think, just a fancy way of saying they were out of there very quickly.
Okay, so the next question is, on other nights we eat vegetables.
Yes.
Why on this night bitter herbs?
Because, okay, so the salt, so like I know I'm picturing the Seder plate, and I'm picturing the different things here, and the bitter herbs I would imagine is the bitterness. There's some sort of bitter association, but I'm also remembering that you dip things in salt water for tears, which also seems like that was connected to bitterness. But I believe the bitter herbs are because it is like so many horrible things happened to get to this point. And the fact that the Jews were in this position, I guess, I don't know if this is true, but it just seems like it might be, right? Which is almost better.
I think so.
Yeah. I think it was probably something to do with the fact that this whole ordeal, this whole thing represents some sort of ordeal, one of many that the Jewish people have gone through, and as such we symbolize it by eating the vegetables that nobody wants.
So the next question. There's only two more. So on all other nights we don't dip even once. Why on this night do we dip twice?
I think that's the salt water. That's got to be dipping the salt water. I think that has to be it. That has to be dipping the salt water. And I think that is to symbolize the tears. Again, whose tears? I'm not sure. Presumably it's our tears,
right.
The Jewish tears.
Right.
And I think we don't dip at all. Like, why would you dip good food in salt water? But this time you are dipping twice. Yeah, you're dipping like a vegetable or some sort of dippable food item into salt water.
Last question. On all other nights we eat either sitting upright or reclining. Why on this night do we recline?
We should change that one.
Love it. That doesn't seem practical.
It doesn't seem practical. I imagine it has to do. There's some sort of ritual meaning, ritual significance behind putting yourself in a position of comfort, as a way of self-care, as we reflect on traumatic cultural or moments in our collective cultural history. And I'm sure at the time, like, reclining was like a very luxurious way to eat, right?
Yeah.
I think we envision like.
I think the Romans.
Right, exactly. Right, you think of other cultures as having these like, everyone kind of like lounging around with grapes and the Jews are like, well, it's a special occasion. I guess we should do that too.
I buy it.
Yeah,
we get to recline.
It sounds like that could be the answer.
And eat mothballs.
Yeah,
amazing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Of course, my pleasure.
This was perfect.
This was wonderful.
My questions are all answered.
Good, wonderful. That's great. My job is done.
Yay! Cheers.
Cheers.
Soup.
Yes.
So he survived, carried on traditions. There's two more items on the CV from earlier. Submitted to President Carter in May 1978, a memorandum regarding a monument for the Holocaust period. Participated as an invited guest in the meetings of the President's Commission on the Holocaust in Washington in 1979 at the recommendation of Congressman Bill Green.
So, if you have some questions, maybe, please ask. That's all. I finish, I spoke. Yes, I came to Palestine, from Romania. Because I said already when you were here.
You started.
Yes.
I'll listen to
Yes, in the short way. To Romania, and then I arranged and came to Palestine. And then I realized that I couldn't support myself. I wanted to finish my studies. Uncle Martin helped me, and I came here. And here I finished. I went first of all to the new school, got my MA. And later, to NYU, got my PhD. Because of the job, I met Mother. And we decided to get married. After the war, I was I was thinking, after this experience, I don't want to do it again. This was my mother changed my mind. And this is after this mind.
He lived the rest of his life in New York City, in a co-op called Village View in the East Village, apartment 10B, 155 East 4th Street between 1st and Avenue A, as we'd always say when we hopped in a cab to go home after a show. He earned a master's degree in political science from the New School, a PhD from NYU in Hebrew and Near Eastern Studies. He published 3 books, countless articles, and letters to various editors correcting their work. He had 2 children and 3 grandchildren. There's this totally gorgeous photo shoot of my grandparents and Uncle Mark in the playground at Village View. What's important, though, is that they're on the bench in the playground. My brother Benjamin and I grew up visiting that playground on trips to New York. I think that if she hadn't been in Williamsburg at the time, my grandma would have happily died on the bench in that playground. It makes me happy to think that the reason that she sat on that particular bench, out of all the benches in the playground, is that that is where she always sat, which, obviously, but what if it's also where they always sat? And that's what never occurred to me before. So, when we celebrated her 80th birthday, and the entire family, literally almost everyone, is sitting there on that bench, he's also there. So it turns out that I've been sitting next to you the whole time.